Good evening, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good night, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the news. In the midst of all the craziness surrounding the midterms, we do not want to overlook a huge, and I mean huge, defeat for Bumble and Biden and his student loan scam. As you know, over the summer, the author Lee blathering idiot in the White House sunk to a new low, forcing taxpayers to pay off the student loans of a bunch of woke deadbeat college grads. The legacy media, which by its nature shills for anything left-wing, or anything that could possibly help the Democrats. They use many different words for this debt transfer. Some referred to student debt as cancelled by Biden, others said student debt was being forgiven or relieved. But taxpayers knew that Biden had effectively attempted to transfer hundreds of billions of dollars worth of college student loan debt away from the students and over to us taxpayers. In fact, a Penn Wharton study concluded that Biden's scam amounted to upwards of $1 trillion worth of student debt transferred over to taxpayers. The notion that this debt was somehow magically forgiven, or wiped out or expunged, obliterated into some abyss was, of course, patently absurd. Debts have to be paid for, and thanks to Bin Merlin Biden, we the taxpayers were now the ones responsible for paying this debt to the tune, by the way, of $2,000 per taxpayer. Working class families were now saddled with paying the college debt of a woke gender studies student. It was utterly absurd. Well, it looks like this absurdity, and I am ecstatic to announce this. It looks like it just got crushed by the courts. A Trump-appointed Texas federal judge has officially struck down the executive order as blatantly unconstitutional. Judge Mark T. Pittman wrote that Biden's program was a complete usurpation of congressional authority by the executive branch. Judge Pittman wrote, quote, "No one can plausibly deny that it is either one of the largest delegations of legislative power to the executive branch, or one of the largest exercises of legislative power without congressional authority in the history of the United States." He went on to write, quote, "In this country, we are not ruled by an all-powerful executive with a pen and a phone. Instead, we are ruled by a constitution that provides for three distinct and independent branches of government. The court is not blind to the current political division in our country. But it is fundamental to the survival of our republic that the separation of powers as outlined in our Constitution be preserved. And amen to that. In other words, Biden's arbitrary and capricious attempt at unloading $1 trillion of student debt on the taxpayers via an executive order has absolutely no grounds whatsoever in a constitutional republic." Charles Cook over at National Review responded best. This was not a victory for a conservative advocacy group, as the Washington Post had previously reported the shills they are. It was a victory for the rule of law. It was a victory for Article 1. It was a victory for the separation of powers. It was a victory for people who can read. It was a victory, in other words, for America's beautiful constitutional order, and that it was. But we shouldn't underestimate just how powerful conservative forces were in issuing this ruling. In fact, President Trump's stocks behind this ruling. I'm going to show you exactly why he's getting the last laugh here. In many respects, this federal judge striking down Biden's blatantly unconstitutional transfer into debt from students to taxpayers is for the left nothing less than a fulfillment of a rather ominous prophecy made by the left-wing Guardian when they wrote the headline a couple of years back, "Trump's judges will call the shots for years to come." Look at this stat. President Trump appointed more federal judges in his first term than any president in the past 40 years since Jimmy Carter. Trump had 220 federal judges confirmed throughout his 4 years, just short of Carter's impressive number of 260. Now, of course, Trump appointed a record number of Supreme Court justices, 3 in his all too short 4 years. That's of course 33% of the Supreme Court. And it really was just the crown jewel of Trump's transformation of the judiciary, where he appointed 30% of all U.S. appellate judges. And it's not just the magnitude of that number. It's also the estimated time that they'll be serving. According to The Guardian, the average age for a Trump-appointed appellate judge is 47 years, which is 5 years younger than the average age of Obama's appointees. In fact, there were several Trump-appointed judges in their 30s. They'll be serving for at least the next generation, some upwards of 2 generations. Again, as reported by The Guardian, the Federal Judicial Center found that this age disparity means that Trump judges will serve a total of 270 years more than Obama judges and will decide 1,000s upon 1,000s of more cases, And as we can see with this Texas federal judge who was appointed by Trump, these are primarily staunch conservative judges. President Trump worked very, very closely with advisors from what's called the Federalist Society, particularly the conservative Leonard Lea, for the purpose of restoring the integrity of the federal bench by appointing originalist judicial nominees who will apply the law as it was originally written and intended, rather than the ways in which liberal ideologues seek to twist it and use it for political purposes. Now, what all of this means for us, especially now in the shadow of these midterms, is that with Republicans looking to take over the House as just projected today by NBC News, the Biden legislative agenda is effectively dead. Biden's agenda is going nowhere with a Republican House. It doesn't matter what happens in the Senate. That's irrelevant. So with Biden's legislative agenda effectively crushed, he has to turn to EO's executive orders to get anything done. But what we're finding is that the courts, the federal courts, transformed by Trump himself, had been crushing Biden's EOs, the courts, and ultimately, of course, the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. They have struck down the CDC. The Center for Disease Control has attempted playing landlord during COVID. Right when it enacted a federal eviction ban during the whole COVID outbreak, the court came out and said that the CDC cannot pretend to be a national housing regulator dictating the landlords what they can and cannot do. And then the court struck down Biden's OSHA vaccine mandate for all workers in all industries and workplaces above 100 employees. The court struck down the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's attempt at trying to enforce carbon emissions rules that Congress has repeatedly rejected. In other words, as a federal administrative agency, you don't get to bypass Congress. That's the recurring theme. So Trump's transformed judiciary system, climaxing with a conservative Supreme Court, has an astonishing message for Biden. Your days are trying to dictate woke left-wing liberalism from the executive branch are over. They're not happening under our watch, and there's absolutely nothing that bumbling Biden can do about it. And some significant news. Well, this right here is perfect timing of Dave Chappelle hosts SNL for the first time in a while. And one thing I wasn't expecting was for Dave Chappelle to mention Donald Trump's name at all. But he did, and what he said was perfect. We're currently forced to have this discussion about whether it's time to dump Trump or not. The establishment media, of course, is behind this whole narrative. The Never Trump heirs, Murdoch's Fox News. And of course, the Democrats are totally on board, working together to finally oust Donald Trump from a political arena. And just a random funny thought that comes to mind: Donald Trump's been investigated endlessly for 6 years straight. I could promise you one thing, I could tell you one thing is for sure. One thing is definitely true, that if Donald Trump ever decided that he wasn't going to run, or that he was taking a step away from the political world, I could pretty much guarantee you all of those criminal investigations. And that tells you more than you need to know. But anyways, we've been having this discussion, and there's opinions on both sides. But I remain in the camp that Donald Trump isn't the problem. I mean, Donald Trump wasn't even really a major factor in this election. If anything, this was the first election in the last 6 years, or Donald Trump wasn't really present. This was Mitch McConnell's election. So how is it that it could possibly be Donald Trump's fault? I'm not exactly sure. But the idea that Donald Trump's the problem and that he should be dumped, I find the notion to be a complete joke. Frankly, I still believe Donald Trump to be one of the most powerful figures of my lifetime. And it seems as though I'm not the only one, because even Dave Chappelle on Left Wing SNL the other night was essentially making the same point. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean. And let me tell you exactly why Dave Chappelle is absolutely correct. Let's continue to hammer the point forward, because of course, the media will never defend Donald Trump. So somebody has to let me show you guys what I mean. He hit the nail so flush, so right on the head, a friggin' critical strike. Talk about what you will say what you want about Donald Trump. He is still the de facto leader of the Republican Party, and there is nobody even close to him. Well, Ron DeSantis is pretty close. But Ron DeSantis without Donald Trump is nothing. Let's keep it real here. There is no DeSantis without Trump, and if DeSantis doesn't get the stamp of approval from Donald Trump, then it's pretty much game over. Get people can look you straight in the face and argue that betraying Donald Trump and trying to oust him, that siding with the establishment GOP and betraying Donald Trump is a good idea and the only way that the GOP can win ever again, says Paul Ryan. I mean, I've heard a lot of stupid things in my life. That one takes the cake. And it's very simply because of what Dave Chappelle is saying here. Two specific words: authenticity and relatability. I've said this forever. Donald Trump doesn't have a lying problem. Donald Trump has a truth problem. Donald Trump has an open book problem. He's a guy who actually says things. He says the things that people say behind closed doors. He says the obvious truths that politicians are constantly trying to avoid, and Dave Chappelle hits on one of the greatest hypocrisies of the left here, one of the biggest talking points and scandals over and over again, like damn broken record, like we've heard from these lefties. Donald Trump's tax returns. Donald Trump's tax returns. Remember the last-minute October surprise right before the 2020 election? I forget which outlet it was. I think it was the Washington Post, but I might be incorrect. All of a sudden, they released document proof that Donald Trump paid almost nothing in income tax, and the left was outraged. How dare he? Most people who are looking at it honestly, first of all, knew two things. The first is those documents didn't show the full picture at all. And secondly, no one was really surprised by it. An extremely successful entrepreneur who owns his own companies is taking advantage of tax loopholes. Yeah. No, Sherlock, you know, business people of all sizes have accountants for a reason. You know, those people who go to school and study the most boring profession, accounting. You think those people do it because they just love numbers, and they love making financial statements? No, they do it because there's big money in it. Accountants wouldn't be so highly paid, and they wouldn't exist if they didn't exist to help people pay less in taxes, and especially corporations and entrepreneurs. And Donald Trump's the first politician to stand up on that stage and say, yeah, of course, I'd pay low taxes. Everybody does. In fact, Hillary Clinton probably does. Compare it to the grand scheme and the total pot of what she's participating in. You know, all of her donors. You know, all of those big Democrat mega donors. You think they're paying taxes? I mean, let's just look at FTX as the crypto scam, funneling money into Democrat interest groups. Well, would you look at that? FTX US is operating out of the Bahamas. I wonder why? Because it's a tax haven. And so once again, it's the hypocrisy of the left. Oh, he doesn't pay taxes. He must be an evil rich person. But Democrats put in the same position also would probably try to pay less in taxes. Oh, millionaires and billionaires are evil. Let's eat the rich. Every Democrat says that until they make money themselves, and all of a sudden, oh, well, let's not go that far. And so this was the power of Donald Trump, the fact that he was actually authentic, and clearly these other characters, these other politicians who are saying one thing and doing another, are viewed generally as inauthentic, as liars, as part of the ruling class, as behind that closed door, as Dave Chappelle put it, as in the house and not telling you what's going on in there. They don't want you to know the funniest part of all. Donald Trump, as we know, is using a whole lot of tax loopholes that were created during the Obama years. I don't care what anyone says, Donald Trump is still the only hope. Oh, but he lost in 2020. Cabinet Republicans gained seats in the House, and he lost in 3 states by 40,000 votes total, not to mention the circumstances of the 2020 election, the riots, the pandemic, the mail-in voting, the entire media establishment working against him, trying to destroy him, publishing propaganda, slander, hit pieces against him every single week, a new Donald Trump scandal, Facebook and Twitter censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story, his own party, the GOP working to sabotage him like usual. If you still got 75 million votes and was 40,000 votes away from winning the entire thing, we're gonna actually sit here and pretend like Donald Trump is a weakness. Donald Trump is a liability. He's the anchor that's holding people down. Meanwhile, the 2022 election, with an actual nursing home patient who can't read sentences and can't speak, is the President of United States lead the country into a recession, into an inflation crisis, into war, destabilize the Middle East, lost complete control of the southern border during this time where Republicans were supposed to win a massive blowout victory in the House and in the Senate. And where Mitch McConnell and the RNC were in charge of the election, how money was being spent, what the messaging platform was, and of course, the campaign ads. This was Mitch McConnell's election, and somehow it's Donald Trump's fault. The guy who's been silent for the last 2 years, the guy who's banned on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube, the guy who didn't even really campaign all that much and purposely, from what I understand, took a step back during that election season. We're gonna honestly sit here and blame Donald Trump? You're out of your damn mind. Meanwhile, the biggest victory was a total MAGA takeover of Florida. I don't want to hear any of it. What Dave Chappelle was alluding to is authenticity. Donald Trump is the first politician to actually look at Americans in the eye and say, you know what? I see you, I understand you. You men and women that are living in towns that have been forgotten, and decimated by globalist shipping jobs overseas with methamphetamine, heroin and fentanyl flooding your streets, an alcoholism and drug abuse epidemic, joblessness, crime, you people who have been left out of the American dream, I see you and we're going to do something about it. He's the first president to do that and say that, and that's why people show up for him in record numbers. Mitch McConnell's not doing that, Mitt Romney's not doing that, Lindsey Graham's not doing that. Mehmet Oz is not doing that. And honestly, Kathy Barnett probably wouldn't have been able to either with or without a Donald Trump endorsement. At the end of the day, the only person who is still capable of doing that, of bringing those people out, of connecting with them, it's Donald Trump, the only guy who shows up to those debates. Maybe his 2020 performances weren't the greatest, but you know that 2016 saga was something else. The guy who shows up and tells it exactly like it is, says, you know, that swamp, I've been there, done that, this is what it's like, and we're gonna do something about it. The only guy who's ever done that, the only guy who has the reputation of being authentic and genuine in that sense, is Donald Trump. And no wonder the GOP is falling apart without him. And now they want to blame him and act the same mutiny they tried to after January 6th and Nikki Haley's and Lindsey Graham's of the world. Like I said, I've heard a lot of stupid things. This one takes the cake. Thank you so much for listening. God bless. I'll be back soon with another report. God speak to each and every one of you. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you for all of your